Do you remember what saved Joseph's marriage? He had just received the news that his fiancée was pregnant, and he knew he wasn't involved in that. And so with great sorrow and shame, the marriage was off until he had a dream. And he listened to the dream. The Magi were following their own path in Persia, but they had read the Jewish scriptures because they were always interested in finding out where the truth was. Could it be here? Could it be there? And so they knew the prophecy that said that maybe, just maybe, God would come to earth in the form of a Messiah, and that there'd be a star to show where that took place. And when they saw the star, they went. They had a funny feeling about Herod, and that was confirmed in a dream where they were told, stay away from him, he's dangerous. So they went through all the work of remapping their route back. Joseph and the Magi were very different in a lot of ways. Joseph was a Jewish man who went to the synagogue every week. The Magi were totally different. They were seekers from an eastern land. But they both knew the same thing. And that is that the invisible world is bigger and more real than the world we can see. That is something that all people have to know as a starting point. The invisible world is bigger than we can see. And we can see a lot. I mean, we have 5 senses. We have all this technology. Now we have the Hubble telescope, which can see 15 billion light years into space. 15 billion light years. 15 billion times 7 trillion miles. We can see a lot. And the invisible world is bigger than all that. Our universe fits comfortably in the invisible world. Joseph knew that, and the Magi knew that. But the Magi were people who didn't have a set religion. They were seekers. They were like the kind of people today who describe themselves as spiritual but not religious. Have you heard that? Do you have people in your family who speak that way? Spiritual but not religious. That's the Magi. Another word for that is agnostic. So they're people who don't have a firm religious practice. They don't follow one path, but they know that the invisible world is bigger and contains the visible world. So they are out looking, always looking. So today's Magi, today's spiritual but not religious people, don't come to church as often as we do. Maybe they don't come at all. But they're more likely to take meditation classes, maybe go to yoga. Maybe they're into some nutritional path, or maybe they follow astrology or astronomy. But that's the way that they're trying to find the truth. And a lot of us would really prefer that they get their bottoms in church. That would be better. But obviously, the Magi show us that some people don't get to God that route. They get to God through another route. And interestingly, we always pray for agnostics at Mass. We always pray for them. And you're going to hear it today. In the Eucharistic prayer that we're praying today, I'm going to say, Lord, we ask you to gaze upon all those who take part in this offering. Those who are gathered here before you, your entire people, and all who seek you with a sincere heart. Everyone who hasn't found this path, but is seeking you, we include them in your family too. Agnostics are very appealing in many ways because they can't be lazy. An agnostic, a seeker, cannot be lazy, or they will not find what they're looking for. They have to be diligent. A seeker can't rest until they pursue what it is that they're seeking. And one of the things that people will often do, because I'm a priest, is a parishioner might bring their teenage child or grandchild, or maybe somebody in their family in their 20s, and they'll drag them in by their ear and they'll say, "Father, she doesn't go to church. She's agnostic." And I understand why that's a concern. And yet I have to say to that person, whoever this agnostic is, good for you for your honesty. Good for you for your authenticity. Good for you for wanting to find it and not wanting to settle until you do. Thank you for your honesty. I think that's something that all of us have seen in certain people in our lives. Sometimes it's even religious people. Not everybody who comes to church here experiences faith the same way as everybody else. There are folks here who have found their way here by a longer route. I don't know how many of you were at our Easter Vigil celebration in 2016. It's a joint celebration for both of the parishes because it's so big we could never duplicate it. Happens once a year. We hope you can come sometime. That's the night that anyone who's becoming Catholic is celebrated for the first time. The unbaptized are baptized. The people who maybe were baptized but have never been confirmed or had first Eucharist, they come. And that year we had just one person, and it was a seeker, Barbara Semix. And I don't know if you remember her story at all, but Barbara Semix had gone throughout her whole life from church to church to church. She was seeking. The church she was raised in was lovely, but it didn't quite fit her. And then she spent a whole bunch of time raising her kids in a church, but it was never exactly right, but she never gave up. She came to St. Mary's for the funeral of a dear friend who lived here in New Baltimore, Annalise Blosser. She came to her funeral and she said, "Oh my gosh, this is it." She knew immediately, this is what I've been looking for. And sometimes you'll talk to people who've been on a long religious journey and they'll say, it took me a long time. It took me 6 decades or more, but I found it. And that joy is irrepressible. She danced down the aisle that night as we walked out, didn't she? Atheism is totally different than that. Atheism, by definition, says, search is called off, there's no God. You know what atheism actually says? There's no invisible world. It's only what we can see. And that is such a misfortune. You know, if I were to talk to someone who subscribes to atheism about life, they would shut it all down very quickly. Because for them, the search is over. Often called off before it began. And so they might say, how can you prove that there's a God? And yet they so eagerly defend the idea that there is no God. So if you get into a conversation about it, it turns into, well, prove there is, which is boring. Because after all, I would love to share with them my experiences of the invisible world. I would love to share with them the moments that the invisible world has entered my world. But they wouldn't listen because they don't believe in that world. They don't know that there's a world beyond this. They don't know what Joseph knew or the Magi knew. So we have to understand that that attitude could affect us if we're not careful, because it even finds its way into religion. Some religious people don't realize that that attitude has entered their lives, but it does it a different way. It's a backdoor way to get in. For we who are more religious, the way this happens is when we have an idea about God in our brain that we maybe got when we were a kid, or we got on a retreat a long time ago, or we read in the Bible once in one passage that we've lifted out, and that's the passage that we like best. And we make our whole view of God on that. And it's almost like, for those of you who are into computers and attachments, it's like a PDF. It can't be adjusted. It can't change or grow in any way. You can't get new information and say, oh, I never knew that about God before, but I had a dream. Or this happened in my life, and now I understand God better. For a lot of us, once we've got that PDF, there's no letting it go, no matter what. And that's exactly what stopped so many religious people from recognizing Jesus. Haven't you ever wondered, would I have recognized him if I were there? Or would I have been one of those people, no, not him. He doesn't look enough like the PDF I have in my brain. That's the problem, is that when you call off the search, when you think, at my age, I don't need to learn anything new, well then, there's no search that can bring you any more. We live with a PDF, and the PDF may or may not be what God is really like. We may have only been seeing a piece of the picture. In fact, we know that for sure, being human. On Christmas week, we were treated to a celestial gift. Saturn and Jupiter lined up perfectly. And if you went outside at sunset and looked up at that direction of the sky, you would have seen nothing because it was cloudy. But it was still there. The invisible world is bigger, more real, and contains all of the visible.